Welcome, class, to the second World History lecture. This one is on Social Crisis, War and Revolution, and Chapter 14.2. And the key question, that focus question you guys are going to have to answer, is how did the social crisis in Europe between 1550 and 1650 lead the way to long-term change? So this is a set of maps. Believe it or not, it's the same place. The Holy Roman Empire in Europe. And so this is the center of Europe, and the Holy Roman Empire. It sounds like it could be an empire, and there's a quip by Voltaire, who was a contemporary of the empire, a French gentleman working in the court of one of the King Louis, saying the empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. The map on the left shows you the various statelets, basically, that make up the Holy Roman Empire, kind of like the U.S. states. There are many, many countries within the Holy Roman Empire. So there's a lot to it. It's very, very complicated and rooted in the Middle Ages. But I want to draw your attention to this map on the right, which shows the religious makeup of the various Holy Roman Empire states. Blue on this map indicates Catholic areas. Dark red represents Calvinists, which is the same kind of Protestant Christian as in England. And then the light pink are Lutherans, who are, was the original kind of Protestantism that was created in Germany, and initially began to dominate as far as Protestantism is concerned. One of the main crises, if you look at, it says here, this is in German, Königreich Bohemia, I guess. I'm not really good at speaking German. But that basically is the Kingdom of Bohemia, modern day Czech Republic. One of the big things we're going to look at in this section is the King of Bohemia, a member of the Holy Roman Empire, changes his religion to Protestant Christianity, which basically would have given the Protestants a majority in the empire, where it had used to be a Catholic empire. That holy comes from the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire getting their crown from the Pope. So, why this happened? Long story short, you can read this slide and it will tell you the same thing. But basically, the conquering of the New World by Europe brought them two main things that caused both problems and helped them a lot. Believe it or not, the potato made it so Europe's population did what it shows you in this graph right here. It just escalated. Potato is an incredible, incredible food source, and basically provides enough nutrients that people live. There's a direct correlation to how much food there is in a society and how many people there are in it. The more calories available, the more people. You can look at the modern world to kind of see the results of that. Inflation happened because, again, in the conquering of that New World Empire, the Spanish in particular brought in so much gold that it tanked the value of individual gold, coins and things like that, making it so you needed more money, physically more gold, because all money was gold at this point, or silver, to actually buy the same amount of things. The poor couldn't do it. The rich found themselves poorer. And so, no peasant in medieval Europe has a gold coin, and so they just starved in many cases. Further, pushing people to North America. So it's amazing how all this stuff is connected. So in a crisis, people tend to turn on the most vulnerable in their society. And so witchcraft is basically a name that was used by Catholics to describe pre-Catholic religious practices in Europe that had kind of survived the conversion. Now I have a small, let's see, it's slightly covered. But basically it would be women over the age of 50 were most typically targeted. And, so that's where you start getting your stereotypes about witches and things like that in the modern world. But there were men, there were children, there were animals that were accused of being witches. And it's basically people are looking and wondering, why can't I, feed my family when I could, my grandfather could, and not really understanding the answer to it being, something that happened in Mexico in gold mines. And so, people basically, this is used as another excuse by the governments of these countries to kind of consolidate authority. So that's, again, one of the big themes of this unit is, there's a crisis and the opportunity is taken to strengthen the role of the state. Instead of it being something very distant or, personal relationship, it starts to become, hey, look, we're going to keep people from being hung as witches. Maybe we should, have a little bit more respect for the king, or even just think about them more, or the queen in the case of England. So, 30 Years' War is in some ways one of the most important events in this entire unit. It ends up encompassing most of the countries in Europe and ends in 1648. This map shows you the result of uh, the Peace of Westphalia, which established the idea of countries. And I know that sounds pretty extreme, like we've been talking about, even in this unit, France and Spain and England. But before the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, a country was really considered the personal property almost of the monarch. And not even almost, that's exactly what it is. And then after that, you start having the idea of borders being something that are defined. There really were not borders before the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. And again, I know that sounds confusing or counterintuitive, but as a small example, a little bit later or a little bit earlier in history, you've got somebody like William of Normandy who ends up conquering England. He owns a little chunk, and if you can see my mouse here, of northern France called Normandy, goes and conquers England. He's now the King of England, but he's also still the Duke of Normandy. So technically, this map is accurate even after William goes and conquers England. He's a vassal, meaning a servant effectively of the King of France, as well as being the King of England. If that's his mind bending, don't worry about it. We're not doing medieval history. So, importantly, this is a war about religion in some ways, but it's also about power. So, you're asked in your summative assessment, which was this more about? And, as everything in history, truthfully, it's both, and it's arguable. That's why you're arguing about it. But again, Bohemia, the modern day Czech Republic, you can see it's blue over here. They are, trying to convert to Protestantism. And because of this, 8 million people die, 20% of Germany's population. It is just a brutal, brutal war. And again, just thinking back to connections to U.S. history, the reason that Germans are a majority of the American population, or people of German extraction, is because of wars like this. People just left Germany in droves and went to countries like the future United States. So, and speaking of the future United States, if these guys look familiar in the background with their little hats and, kind of looking pilgrimy, it's because they are. So the English Civil War is fought effectively by the Puritans, who end up being the founders of New England, in order to get rid of the kingdom, basically, in England. And they win, unbelievably. There's a lot of different steps to get there, but basically King James believes, who is I believe, the cousin of Queen Elizabeth, he becomes the king after she's gone. She kind of rules with a light hand, doesn't, anger the Catholics or the Protestants. James comes in and says, God made me king, and therefore everyone should just do everything I want them to do, and we're going to make the church more Catholic. The Puritans, again, the founders of Boston, New England, all of the places that we live, they basically say that he is against God because he's trying to get rid of the rights of religious minorities and make the church more Catholic. His son is even more Catholic and inserts more Catholic elements into the Protestant church that dominates England. And so the Puritans rise up and start the English Civil War. The English Civil War very quickly becomes not just a conflict between religious factions, as it becomes a conflict about political power, and in fact, what government is. If you remember back to US 1 and US 2, we talked about, or if you're taking con law with This with the Pine right now, for example, you've got the idea of rule of law. This is in direct contrast to the divine right of kings, right? Like the idea that everyone has to follow the same set of rules cannot exist in the same world where a king has God's permission to do whatever they want. So the supporters of the king and frankly autocracy, meaning rule of one or, undemocracy, I know that's not a real word, they are known as the Cavaliers. So the parliament, because it has a large Puritan faction, because lots of the nobility are Puritans, even though most of the people aren't, they are called the Roundheads because they're kind of seen as stuck up and not very fun. If you've ever seen Footloose, they do things like band dancing and Christmas. Footloose is not about the English Civil War, although it is a bit of a travesty, but I'll get in trouble for saying that. Parliament gets this young noble, basically a minor nobody, named Oliver Cromwell as their military leader. He makes an army called the New Model Army that is new in the sense that they pay them. And that's they're very effective because everyone else is just drafted into the military and they serve for a certain amount of time and they go back to their farm or whatever. Cromwell's soldiers are really proud of themselves. They got these fancy standards, and they, after the king is executed by Parliament, they name him Lord Protector effectively. And so he is kind of a dictator, which is a little bit ironic considering Parliament's fighting for rule of law, but Parliament's the one that gives them the dictatorial powers, so they feel okay with it. And if you are from Massachusetts or you live in Massachusetts, you may have wondered why our state is called the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Well, that's because the word Commonwealth was used for England when it had the flag that's in the presentation here, which is again the flag of the English Commonwealth. Commonwealth just means democracy in English, because democracy is a Greek word meaning rule of the people. Commonwealth is the English version. So yeah, Massachusetts, because the Puritans end up losing, they ultimately lose the Civil War's aftermath, that a lot of them flee to New England and make a new version of it. So the deal made between the English monarchy and Parliament by the Glorious Revolution is basically getting rid of divine right of kings. That's what it means. Parliament is supreme. And so what this does is it basically creates the only country in Europe that has rule of law baked right into itself. And it's because of this weird history with Puritans and Catholics and Parliament and the king and divine right versus rule of law. And ultimately, it's all codified into the English Bill of Rights, which has lots and lots of the same stuff as the American Bill of Rights. And is the reason the American Bill of Rights was created is because, again, think of New England. The Puritans founded this area. They're refighting the Civil War in a sense when they fight the American Revolution. So it's amazing, again, how much world history connects everything that may make less sense out of context. All right, so that is that. I'm just going to go back to the beginning to remind you of the focus question. How did the social crisis in Europe between 1550 and 1650 lead to long-term change? Again, social crisis, we've got inflation, remember the witchery and all that kind of stuff, and also religious conflict. So that's also a social crisis. You've got a lot of ways to answer this question. All right, good luck. How do I turn this thing off?